All right, I think we still got folks coming in, but don't want to delay too much. Let's get this show started here. Then I think we want to jump to the next slide. Oh, perfect. So quick safe harbor statement. We're real quick. We're gonna probably myself or Ben or Veronica might say a few things about Workdays with regards to future, but if you're evaluating the product, just do so on the current feature sets when you think about making any buying decisions. All right, now the legal stuff is out of the way. Let's get to the fun stuff. So today, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're going to be talking about the source to pay transformation and a little bit with how and how it's applied with, we have a great partner with us, Applied Materials. Veronica is going to chat a little bit about their journey and how they went along with it. And we're also going to spend some time and actually walk through Workday, which formerly was Scout RFP via the acquisition a little while ago. We're going to talk through the product itself. So hello, everyone. My name is Stan Garber, previously one of the co-founders of Scout RFP about 6 years ago, and we'll definitely talk about that in a second. And now part of Workday via the acquisition in December 2019. Now I'm focusing on the go-to-market strategy for the spend pillars. It sort of expanded out. Now we have strategic sourcing, which is used to be Scout. We have Workday. Within Workday, we have P2P and inventory, a few others. But with me, really excited to have, we have two great folks with us. Veronica Jones, if you want to say hi, Veronica, real quick. You with
Hello,
us?
everybody. Yes, can you hear
Perfect.
me?
Yep, and that's a perfect mic check, just to make sure. So thanks for joining us. You'll be talking a little bit about how Applied Materials, their background, and how they've brought in some products, including Workday, and how their organization is structured and what they've done over the last few years. And then with me as well is Ben Kane, who's going to be walking through the actual product itself. Really excited as I'm no longer allowed to demo. Ben is my trusted person. He also previously came from the Scout side, so he's seen quite a bit of deploy. So he'll be spending sort of half of this particular session just walking through the product. So when we look at the agenda, what we're going to get through here in a little bit, we're just going to quickly, I'll just talk a little bit of background on strategic sourcing, how we've thought about creating the product. Applied Materials, Veronica will talk a little bit about how they've evolved as an organization, go through the Workday strategic sourcing, and then live QA. I definitely encourage, if anybody's got questions, either in the chat or in the question area, please drop them in. We'd love to answer these through the conversation and keep it interactive as possible. We don't even want to wait till the end. We'll definitely have some time at the end, but there's a lot of good stuff. And if you have something in mind, I'm pretty sure everybody else is thinking the same thing. So feel free to jump in. So with that, let's get going. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to start off with is it's always fun to start out with some good data points. And what I love about this, and we've had we have access and the privilege now. We've spoken to a lot of CPOs over the last year and change. And what really excites me in saying this is there's never been a better time to be in the world of procurement and sourcing. And the reason I say that is, when you look at the top stat, as the world is opening back up in a lot of different ways, and companies are figuring out how to bring their workforces back in, depending on your organization and how you've dealt with this. And even just fundamental moving forward, how we think about the business, continuity planning, as we've learned so much about the good and bad in our infrastructure over the last year and a half. A lot of organizations are leaning on procurement and the sourcing teams to help in the reentry and the recovery process. And this is coming from top leadership, where I've had a lot of conversation with CPOs where their team is tasked with bringing folks back in the office, tasked with revisiting all the supplier relationships, et cetera. And that's just very exciting across the board, as more and more responsibility is being brought into these orgs. And with that, though, we've seen this not just in sourcing, but the whole business, this acceleration of digital products and just thinking about it overall. And naturally, sourcing is going to be tapped on the shoulder to help actually go achieve that. But the funny part is, even though everybody's we're coming in, we're being asked to do more. The whole business is accelerating from a technology and bringing new vendors in. You still look at it in the middle stat there. 66% of organizations are still saying that cost is still a fundamental important piece of the puzzle. So all of this coming together in a perfect way to say, like sourcing, you have some big responsibilities for us and to help us, which is really exciting. And companies and CPOs are thinking about this, and COOs and CFOs, like, how do we create this high performance procurement culture? And that really starts with, when you look at, if you jump to the next slide, Ben, when we looked at the data and we looked at just how teams thought about it, sourcing really does become that driver in helping organizations create a high performance procurement culture. And it's not just about cost reduction. It is a bubble in the overall equation, but it's really, when you think about time to market, being able to collaboratively work with your supply base, not necessarily just beating them solely on price, but how do they go to market? How do they delivery? All these types of areas you want to improve, eliminating waste within the business, improving efficiencies from how we finish project, how we engage with our stakeholders, just the cycles and the time all around it. All of it working together is an important area. And what it comes down to is, like, these are the key areas to helping create this high performance procurement culture. And why is it even important? We had a chance to partner up with Hackett as they look at some data. If we jump to the next slide, Ben, you look at it and you look at some of the data points around high performance culture. It's not a surprise here, just what a high performing team can do versus one that isn't. They've sort of looked at, you basically do a lot more with less. 28% fewer headcount you need to accomplish, 20% higher, lower operating costs fundamentally within the team, 85%, they can drive 85% more higher cost reduction and savings across the board. And ultimately, you're going to drive a higher ROI. And these are just some of the data points. We'll be able to send this deck afterwards, so don't feel like you need to jot these down or anything. We'll give them to you afterwards. But these are just some data that we just wanted to share to say, why is this important in this concept of high performing procurement organizations? And it really stems from two areas. One ultimately is going to be the people that are going to help you build this, the training, the discipline, the structure, the process. But then also, we really feel, and Veronica, you'll be able to talk to this a little bit too, is there's an area of being able to work together, and we think software is a huge driver in that. And biased, even because we're a software vendor, we feel like that's a key ingredient in helping drive it. It's not the only one, but it's a key one. And this really put us on the journey 6 years ago when we got into this marketplace. When we created Scout, we ourselves didn't know much about procurement, but we filled out a lot of RFPs, and we joked commonly, what we hated more than the RFP was not being invited to one. And we went out and spoke to procurement organizations, and what we found out, a lot of teams told us very quickly, well, we have a full source to pay solution in place. We know how this is run. Here's the process we have. And the more and more we spoke to individuals, we ended up speaking about to 300 different groups. We found out very quickly was the elements of source to pay. Everybody said that they had it, or they bought a product, or they've got a certain process around it, but it was pretty disjointed. And what do I mean by that is, even though you had an application, whether it's a big application or small, you weren't using a lot of the elements of it. So email and Excel, SharePoint became the fundamentals, whether you're doing sourcing, maybe contract management of it, or even savings tracking projects, etc. And then ultimately, when you think about how you actually are collaborating with your stakeholders around this, engaging your suppliers, putting all this data together, it really became a very manual process. And the general feedback was they just weren't used in the products that individuals had. It wasn't something enjoyable across the board. So even though you had this concept of S2P, at the same time you weren't actually realizing it. And this sort of cleared me. This idea really became clear to us early on in Scout's history. We went to a Gartner event, and I just remember sitting down with one of the analysts at the time, and I asked, like, well, folks that buy the full S2P and they sort of go on this journey when they want to go and bring out all these modules online, get everybody to use. And the analyst told me at the end of the day, she's like, well, about 90% of those folks don't actually realize what their intention was. And for a number of reasons, the team didn't adopt it, integration didn't go as planned. There's lots of different challenges, and ultimately you sort of get a disjointed world. And for us, when we look to differentiate ourselves on the sourcing side, and really, because we found that was a very, very big side that wasn't well adopted and loved from a software standpoint, we took a different approach. And our approach, Ben, if you jump to the next slide here, we really wanted to look at how to make it easy and an enjoyable process, because this is part of the equation where you're working with your supply base to get bids, collaborate with them on contract, get information from them, the end users, which is the core sourcing team itself, and then the stakeholders, actually working with the business, whether it's finance, marketing, IT, etc. How are they collaborating with you? And we said all of this has to happen in step one, an enjoyable experience. And the reason I say this and want to focus on just a second about for this, when you think of software today, everything we use outside of outside the four walls, it's intuitive, it's simple. Ordering food online, ordering, a car via app, checking at the airport, as we're doing more and more in that. No one's really trained us or taught us how to do any of these things, but billions of transactions are going through these applications every single year. And the reality is they're very complex tools, but no one's really had to go through a huge education curve because we were able to intuitively figure these out. And our idea was, how do you take this concept of consumerization of the enterprise and apply it? And for us, we found sourcing is a perfect candidate for it. If you can build a pizza online, you should be able to, Ben, if you go back to that slide, sorry, you should be able to really quickly build an RFP online. And that was the approach. So from an enjoyable experience, we really focused on high adoption. So once you get high adoption, you're going to get time to value. And that was really the simplicity of our approach and our difference that's given us quite a bit of traction over the last 6 years as we've gone to market. And to finish this up, Ben, if you jump to the last slide, thanks. Ultimately it comes down to, we started day one on the RFX side, building a very simple, intuitive sourcing application. And from there, really finishing out the source to contract. And then whether you have Ariba, you have Oracle, you've got Workday, you've got another P2P application, we're going to work alongside with it now and play really nicely, but at the same time doesn't require a lot of integration or support to do it. And the first side is intake and pipeline, becomes this idea of one place to organize all your projects, track your savings, manage all the relationships, all the activities you're working with the stakeholders, chat with them. If you need to go to sourcing, great. If not, contract on ongoing supplier management, being able to onboard, scorecard your suppliers, all in one place. And the ultimate part of this and how applied and many others that we work with, they've in essence brought us in for the source to contract components of it while still retaining their P2P core capabilities with whether it's SAP or Oracle, other solutions out there as well. With Workday, we have that as well, tightly working together. But that's really how we found a way to optimize some of that. So with that, I'll stop babbling here a little bit. And I wanted to tap Veronica to come in here and maybe talk a little bit about, let's start off with maybe some background about Applied Materials, your role and how the sourcing and procurement team structured there.
Sure, absolutely. Next slide, Ben. Hi, everybody. My name is Veronica Jones. Today, I lead the indirect strategic sourcing and category management function globally at Applied Materials. Applied Materials was founded in 1967, and currently we are the world's #1 semiconductor and display equipment company. So you can say that we make the systems that make a lot of the chips and materials that change the world. This slide covers some key statistics as of last fiscal year. As you heard Stan cover earlier, sourcing is critical to a high-performance procurement culture. And you can see in the marketplace today, since Applied Materials is within the chip market supply chain, our company is growing exponentially. And indirect procurement is just one of the areas that has to grow and mature to become a competitive advantage for this company's future success. This is not specific to Applied Materials. I think it's very resonant, that Hackett study, across a variety of different companies today. Ben, next slide. So, back in December of, I would say 2019, I was brought in as a part of new leadership at Applied Materials to transform the indirect procurement organization that was known as Global General Procurement. We have an arm related to sourcing and an arm related to operations, and then some center of excellence spaces. And as the new leader for strategic sourcing and category management, I began to assess the landscape immediately for what our team members are doing and how they're performing their work. Currently, we're on a singular ERP in 95% of Applied Materials, which you heard Stan talk about. There are a lot of companies that have that single P2P or S2P solution. However, the P2P suite that we had, or the S2P suite we had, there wasn't really adoption from the strategic sourcing using the tools that were made available to them. What I came to find was that the team was managing sourcing execution and delivery through what we talked about today: Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, and information was transmitted via email, which when there becomes too much email, things were getting lost, forgotten. Worse yet, keep in mind the timing. This is now the beginning of 2020. We're about to embark on a massive pandemic globally, and people will start to work from home. What I came to find is that management teams were using whiteboards to track progress of projects. In-person meetings, everything was very reliant upon people being physically in person, a variety of meetings and whiteboards. At this time, there was no baseline for metrics for spend sourced. There was no cycle time for projects that was available, and the ability to plan for demand or headcount was very limited. There was limited collaboration between our staff members, stakeholders, and suppliers. So as we're at this trajectory turning point, we had a new fearless leader named Ann Fleischel that joined Applied Materials, and she mentioned her experience with Workday Sourcing as that critical software she's had experience with at other companies. You know, as a company of Applied Materials, there were concerns about using a different tool set than our existing ERP solution that was offered. And there was a lot of lively discussion around integration requirements. So, you know, through our sourcing process, we met with a variety of other companies to benchmark and learn from their experience. And we joined a lot of sessions like this to hear from people and understand their experiences and how they handle these different problems. We came to understand that we didn't really have to have full integration with our ERP systems to glean the benefit immediately. And having a separate solution for sourcing was not just plausible, but it could actually help us with our time to value, as you heard from Stan earlier. So we ended up selecting Workday Sourcing, and we began implementation of intake, pipeline, previous slide, intake, pipeline, and the events modules first. We deployed in a phased approach using an agile methodology, and we ran our first event within 10 weeks, which was momentous for our transformation journey. With limited to no integration with our ERP, we were able to standardize the data collection and our processes. We improved visibility for our management teams, as well as collaboration for stakeholders and suppliers. So while this slide shows kind of, you know, hey, check, 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 we have standardization, you know, our outcomes of effectiveness and impact are now tangible and reportable. Next slide. So this is 1 year into our implementation, into our transformation at Applied Materials. I now have baseline metrics that didn't exist before. We can now focus on time to value improvement. If you look at our spend sourced, it has grown. What we're showing here is spend sourced in FY20 versus our goal for FY21. However, if I look at my actuals, if I say Q1 to Q3 actuals right now, because we're about to end Q3, versus my FY21 Q1 to Q3 actuals, the actual sourced is up by almost 36%. This is a demonstration of the improvement of visibility and collaboration with our stakeholders. We now have the ability to store all information in one location about the project. I don't have to schedule meetings to find out the status of things. I can open up my Scout or open up my Workday sourcing project, look at the notes. I can see the action items. I can see the meeting notes. I can see or have a collaborative chat. These things have helped us dramatically. Then for the spend that we have sourced, we're seeing higher returns on the savings. Based on our FY20 full year savings, actuals, versus all savings that has been approved in FY21 year to date, we are already up by 25%. This is evidence of our effectiveness improvement. The ability to standardize supplier responses and do fast comparisons, and the ability to automate the consolidation of ratings and rankings quickly and easily means we can make better informed decisions faster. While we cannot fully contribute all of these benefits to our technology alone, it is a critical factor in our success. You know, we are still on a journey. There's a lot ahead of us to build that world-class indirect procurement organization. But I would say Workday sourcing has been that integral first step. Ben, next slide. So as I talked about, we have the full suite. We focused initially on intake, pipeline, and sourcing. We are implementing, as of right now, contracts and supplier management, so we can start to look at how to mature and grow on that maturity trajectory that we've talked about.
And Veronica, and this is Stan, would love to spend a few minutes with pipeline specifically. Can you, from just like a high level, how is the team starting to use that? And Ben will show the product in just a few minutes, but how is, I know we talked about savings tracking, just sort of like, can you give us a little bit more on how the team is, like how you're using that as sort of your screen to see what's happening, like what types of projects roughly are you tracking? How are you configuring that?
Absolutely. So we have a variety of global resources that are involved in certain categories of spend, let's say facilities, construction. Um, Now because we're able to see by category all of the projects that are available, leadership can actually influence high value projects that they may not have seen before or may not have known about that were taking place within the regions, and get involved and provide coaching and provide oversight. And it doesn't really require you to have to be in every single nighttime call. You can see meeting minutes and you can collaborate via the chat, and everything's in one location. I would say other things that we're, definitely seeing pipeline help us with is across, savings methodology. One of the things that had been, a bit of a strain for us had been having our stakeholders go through the process with us and see the sourcing activity that takes place and understand where cost avoidance or cost savings was coming from, and also being to get buy-in from our finance teams. Because of this tool, we're actually able to route these savings projects through workflow and obtain buy-in and approval from our finance teams. And so they help ratify that savings. So it's helping us to be able to make sure that we are, providing ample visibility to how we're calculating those savings, and ample visibility to our stakeholders so that they agree with us and they're standing alongside us presenting, instead of there being a bit of a conflict around what is true savings or what is true cost avoidance.
Got it. So two things. Love that like finance is approving it, but the first thing you said right in the beginning put a smile on my face. You got out of some late night meetings now because folks didn't need those updates.
Yeah,
Is that
absolutely. Not having to go to, meetings at, 10, 11 o'clock at night so that you can participate in a massive construction project in Taiwan, just to be part of the group and be able to steer things. It helps dramatically with, being representative, having people in the regions representing your sourcing, your spend, and managing that.
Nothing like I would love more than 11 o'clock call, but that does sound pretty cool. Being able to get, one question did come in, Veronica. So for applied materials, increasing the amount of savings by 25%, you mentioned, did you see improvements in the percentage of price deflation year over year?
So it depends on what commodity and category. I think if we all look at the market today, there's a lot of difficulties with commodity price increases. So it really depends on the category, but I would say for certain categories, yes, we did see the ability to provide better visibility around year-on-year price reductions, as well as capping of pricing for longer periods of time.
Awesome, thanks. And right when I remember early on, because I was actually speaking to you when about a year ago plus when we were looking to do this together in the journey. Any tips or from like how you were able to sell this internally? Because to your point, I know it was not a, it wasn't like a, hey, let's add another tool into the tool, into the arsenal. We already have products that do this. Any particular items, whether it's ROI or anecdotal stories or anything that you could share with like, this is how we help sell this internally. And also, I think the other point to add on, we didn't start with like a full, you need to roll this out to everybody. It was a little bit more controlled, and we're seeing growth naturally happen from this.
Correct. 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 So if I address the first question, I think, back to how did we sell it? It really was around return on investment. It's critical to have the right process, people, and systems in order to really transform an organization. So this is one critical pillar. But the things that helped us, especially during such a time of flux, was really being able to document not just an ROI document, but being able to speak to other companies that were willing to share their experiences and their feedback with some of our executives to create case studies around their value and their input. And having our leadership hear or see case studies from other companies that were able to actually see benefit, actually visibly, tangibly see benefit, helped us to get there, And so I think it was those things that kind of pushed over the edge a little bit. And it's wonderful to be able to go back a year later and say, here's the improvement, here's the tangible numbers that we committed to, and we're doing as good or better than we had expected. And I think that, gives a level of credibility. To the second point, I can't recall, what was your second part of your question?
Oh, this just commenting on how when we started working when I just remember, the idea, because you have a fairly
Oh, the
large
rollout
sourcing.
methodology. Yeah.
Yeah, but we sort of chose a group and a team, and like coming
Yeah.
up a year later, we're actually growing. So talking through that a little
Yes.
bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are pretty risk adverse and as a company. And so part of what we looked at was where's the highest ROI? Who do we want to start with and where do we want to focus? And so we started rolling this out to a very specific group of people in sourcing in the United States at very high value levels. And then we started to grow it and grow it over time. And I think Stan and the Workday company are seeing it in our renewals, our requests for more licenses, because it's not just our group that's seeing the value, as our stakeholders are seeing what we're doing. They're and other people that we work with in other parts of procurement or other segments of the business, they're starting to see, the benefits. They're starting to hear some good feedback. They also want to be included in and get their own license and look at the tool as well. So I think that's the other thing is, as we're starting to help other parts of the business, we're using our tool to support them and we continue to grow our volume of licenses because of that.
And we love working with customers, and that's let's figure out the solve for the pain you have today. Let's
Yeah.
not, you don't have to go full on every module and everything right away. It's figuring out what we're solving for, and that's really the how we think about optimizing the S2P process. Because there's going to be areas I sort of mentioned that, the analyst comment that it's not going to be all perfect across the board. It's figuring out what the pain point is today, and then growing from there, and looking through that. And Ben, I'm going to tap you right now to jump in here as we take over. So today, what we thought of going through is, in essence, going through some of these modules at a very high level overview. By no means do we have enough time to go in detail, but just to give you a sense of how the application works and sort of the benefits you could derive from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. And thanks, Veronica, for going so in depth and giving us a little insight into your business. So we're going to bring it to light now within the product. So we're going to try and walk through from left to right most of our modules. And as Stan said, just give you an idea of what the look and feel is and what are some of the big value adds and pain points we're solving for. So we're going to start out doing this today within our intake module. So we're going to start with actually folks outside of procurement or sourcing. And this is going to be somebody out in the business that's looking to start a conversation. So they're looking to procure a new good or service. They're looking to bring a new supplier on board, whatever it may be. This is going to be their source of truth and the way that they interact with the sourcing team. So with single sign-on, all of those stakeholders, they can log in, and at a minimum, they're going to be able to create these new requests. So when I click create new request, that's going to bring us to our project page. And this is where everything in the system begins. So we can build any type of projects, project types that we want here, and they loosely tie to our modules, as you see things like supplier onboarding or performance reviews, of course, sourcing projects, and also contracts. So any kind of contract request that may be coming in from the business can be fielded here as well. But the key takeaway is that as we switch between these different types of requests, it's going to present the user with different questions and a different kind of view here, because each of these requests is going to need different bits of information. For instance, a non-disclosure agreement can be very different from a sourcing request. So we can really dictate exactly what the end user sees and make it as easy as possible for them to submit these requests.
And I think that's one of the things that helped us in our journey for collaboration, was really thinking about, converting, procurement language into something tangible and easy for a stakeholder to understand, being able to kind of step them through by asking them detailed pieces of information we need to do the work, so that everything didn't have to rely on meeting, conversation.
Yeah, such a great point. We're bringing down that back and forth. We're giving peace of mind to the stakeholder that they're filling out exactly what they need to for Veronica and her team to make sense of it. And again, just making it as easy as possible on the end stakeholder so that we get the highest adoption possible. So again, these pages are completely configurable. You'll see favorite color is a great example of that. We can add in anything that you like to this page to capture bits of information. So that would be things like maybe documents that you'd want requested, estimations of spend, that could be your budget that you have to play with, maybe what suppliers we want to work with. We can really tailor this page to gather anything that we want or anything that we need as part of these requests. And one of those examples that Veronica had mentioned was making sure the end user knows what they're looking at. So we can build in hints and things here where if we're asking for something like subject matter support, well, what does that actually mean? Are there supporting areas that are going to need to add their expertise, such as IT or legal or marketing, so we can start bringing those folks in? Or for instance, creating conditionality. So we're only asking the stakeholder fill out questions that are applicable. So from here, we could submit this request. Something that's really important to Veronica and team is that automatic routing. So we see here that this is automatically routed to Teresa Serrano, and that can be based on any characteristic of the request. So for instance, if it's a sourcing request and it's in the IT category, that's going to go to Teresa, for instance. So that kind of resource allocation, we're going to let the system handle that and take that off your team's plates. And then Jock, our stakeholder, he can follow along with all of those requests that he sent in historically. He can follow along with the projects that are running along smoothly, and even play an active role in these projects, which we'll talk about in a moment. But from there, we want to switch now over into the view of a licensed user. So now I'm actually going to inhabit that Teresa Serrano person, and we're going to see what that experience is like. So first thing that we notice right off the bat is that the page looks fairly similar. When we scroll down below, we see sets of requests, we see projects that are active, but at the top we see a savings tracker. And this is one of the big value adds that we hear a lot from our customers, and Veronica had touched on it, was creating a way to very easily see that elusive metric, which is how are we tracking towards our savings goal? What are our identified savings, our realized savings, and how far away are we from meeting our goal? So that's going to flow into each and every project that we have down below that has attributable savings. So everyone has a clear view, moment to moment, day in, day out. And then down below, we see any new requests that are coming in. So we see that new software request that had come in from Jock. It's already been routed to me, Teresa, and I can now come in, look at the nature of that request, look at all the detail that was provided to me, and choose to move that project to an active status. So that's going to fall down below where we're working on those projects, and this is kind of our daily work stream. So this is going to be the view for both Veronica, somebody in leadership that's trying to get a holistic view into everything going on in the business, or it can also be tailored to be the view of a category manager that's got a book of business and all of their projects. They can work from here and get an idea of even what projects may need attention. So projects that are falling behind, maybe we've missed some of our milestones or tasks that we've put in place in the project plan. We're going to notify you of that as well. So this page, again, just really serves to provide everyone with a single source of truth and centralize all of the activities that are going on in the system, or across the procurement department, rather. But let's take a real example here. Let's imagine that that new sourcing request was for a CRM system. So our sales team needs a new CRM. And let's imagine that project is right in the middle of the sourcing activity. We're going to be able to see all of that information that was provided by our stakeholder as part of the request. But we now see that this page has expanded a bit. We have a lot more tabs of information here that we need to gather. And that's what we were talking about earlier with making it easy on the stakeholder. We don't want to ask them all of this information right at the point of request. We can layer that information in as the project becomes active. So part of this project, as Veronica had said, is bringing in all the relevant details, tracking project descriptions, things like budget owner, financial details. So this is the information that populates the savings. And this is a way to, as Veronica had mentioned, create a conventional and standardized way that everyone is tracking savings, whether that be denoting savings as avoidance or rebates or hard savings, and being able to calculate those savings over a period of time.
Yeah,
and
I think
track them
that
toward
piece, is very critical, right? Having the calculations and being able to track multi-year savings. I think this is the space where, for a lot of companies, it's very hard to make sure that you are tracking those multi-year savings year on year on year. Once you close a deal, being able to look back and say, okay, in year one, I was paying rate A. In year two, I'll go down to rate B. In year three, I'll go down to rate C. And making sure that those are accounted for. If you have to rely on a person or a human to remember to enter that in each year, or someone to remember, even if it's entered in, to carry it forward and report on it, it's very difficult. But having it in the system and the system intelligently support that for you, it also helps you with what does your future look like, what's up ahead, what has been sourced and spent, what hasn't been sourced and spent.
Absolutely. Great point. And also just creating a convention or a way that everyone always tracks savings in a similar way. And you also mentioned as well the ability to send for approval. So we can make sure that before we mark this project as completed, that we're sending it to the correct group of people automatically to review. So whether that be finance or legal or anybody in the business, they're going to be able to come in and we have a predetermined approval flow that can be made up of multiple groups or multiple people that are able to come in and say, I approve or reject the information that's in the above project, and make sure that we're always signing off on that information before we mark the project as completed. And that ensures all of this is accurate and all tracked in a standardized way.
And Ben, as you're going through, a few questions came in, just thought I'd sort of tackle as a handful are coming in.
Sure.
One of them was about savings, so that was perfect. And thank you, Veronica. Just some simple ones. Is the solution offering cloud or on-prem based? It is only cloud. From a security standpoint, I mean, we follow everything, like just when you would imagine like Workday with all the sensitive information we have within Workday's customers as well. It's encrypted end to end. It's all, every customer's instance is designed. It's permission-based login. Everybody's got their own data sets per customer, isolated across the board. Definitely can speak to that as well, but very much so secure in every in every way to make sure data's there across the board. Let's see. Can you demo the functionality if we didn't purchase intake and only purchase pipeline? I guess in to Ben's, the only difference if you don't have intake, you would just manually input some of the pipeline projects into the product itself. So just like Ben right now is going through opening up these, you wouldn't have the project automatically go into it. You would just hit add a new project and that's it. So pretty easy across the board. If I understand, a project can be created by anyone in the company, but the dashboard is only for licensed users, paid users, correct? So yes, so if you have intake, any user within the organization can request. If it's, as Ben is clicking at a creative project right now or quick add, those would be licensed users, so you can do that. So we have some organizations that will go through the intake process. Others only have individuals create them and they don't care whether it's smoke signal, a email, water cooler, anything where they're passing a Slack message where they're passing that on. So it sort of depends on the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll also just mention, either way, you can always bring in those stakeholders. So whether the project was requested by a stakeholder or it was created by somebody in the procurement team, we can always bring in those stakeholders to be part of the process, and even as read-write, giving them pretty much all the capabilities we would have as a licensed user for the scope of this one project. So we really encourage collaboration that way.
And then Ben, last question, then we'll let you go through before I interrupt you one more time. Has there been any thoughts around allowing category managers to rank their priorities work to allow them to use pipeline as a to-do list of sorts? Also, is there a way to sort pipeline beyond the requested needs attention and active status? So yes to both of those. You can very much so set up your own fields and allow ranking, and then within the actual, there's two different areas. So you can do saved views right here, and you can set up saved views on every priority, whether it's as well as projects, etc. And you could share these saved views across the board. So way more capabilities. And then the other important part, if we click on navigation, there's also a to-do list, basically. You'll be able to go through and actually, it will give you like, here's the to-dos for your projects, here's the to-do list for your team across the board. So a few different areas where you can activate and look through those areas. So tasks to follow up, my tasks. So this is where you can sort of do the to-do list. So great question there. All right, sorry, Ben, for making you jump around. I'll let you focus on the next few parts of the product.
Yeah, that's a great segue as well. What I really love about these pipeline projects, and in addition to the ability to bring together all of your stakeholders and track all the relevant information you care about, is establishing milestones. I like to think of this as a project plan that is templatized. So all of those different project types that we talked about, we can build a templatized set of milestones, which are just tasks that need to be completed between the start and the end date. So that allows somebody that starts on day one within the procurement department to know exactly what steps in kind of a perfect world they're supposed to complete for a sourcing project, for instance. And this allows us to start assigning these tasks out to members of the team, even those stakeholders, and also be able to track and report across the business. Well, across all of these standardized steps, what's always taking us the longest, or what are we doing inefficiently or efficiently? So it's just a great way to go beyond just the status of the project, but rather what steps have actually been completed by who and what's next. And lastly, another part of bringing all this information together in one place and keeping us out of email is going to be team chat. This is a piece of functionality that follows us through the entire platform, where you're always going to be able to communicate with anybody involved in that project, tag them individually, ask questions, and keep all that communication recorded here within this project specifically. Again, our customers find really no reason to go back to email. They can track every bit of detail within these configurable projects and through the functionality within. But within this sourcing project, the kind of end result of this would be a sourcing event. So within sourcing projects, we'll have an events tab, which is going to bring us into the sourcing module. So we'll first look at building an RFP, and then we'll take a look at that RFP when it's published and what it looks like when we're waiting for responses. So what's great about our system is that, number one, it's highly templatized. So if you want to utilize templates for your RFPs, your RFIs, any of your sourcing events, we highly encourage that. Just saves a lot of time. And the reason we're able to utilize templates so heavily is that any sourcing event you run in the system is always going to follow these same 6 steps we see here across the top. It's just up to you how much or how little of these steps you choose to use for any given type of event. But step 1 is setting up the event, giving it a title and a description, attaching any documents that are relevant, and setting up some of the rules of the road. So is this an RFP or is it an RFI? Is it a general bid, a general inquiry? This is all configurable to you. Whether we want to allow late bids or revisal of bids. We want to set a timeline in step 2. So what is the deadline for which we need all of our submissions to come in? Or what are deadlines we want in place for the suppliers to ask questions or to RSVP? What are the suppliers we actually want to work with or invite to this bid? And again, we pull from our directory for this, which can be integrated with ERPs, integrated with procure-to-pay systems. It can be managed separately as its own list of prospective suppliers. We can do it all. And then step 4, that's going to be our response sheet. So anything we want the suppliers to respond to. And that comes in the form of a questionnaire, a worksheet, or any documents that you'd like uploaded. So worksheet's going to be more of your quantitative information where you're gathering pricing most likely. And then the questionnaire is going to be a series of questions, more qualitative, asking about account management, administration, navigation, anything you care about in terms of understanding that supplier, their business, their product. And we can templatize all of this. So we can have standardized rate cards, we can have standardized questions that we ask. I find that very important, especially in the IT space, for instance, where we need to ask standardized privacy or security questions. And then we have our evaluation, which is going to be your internal scorecarding, if you find that applicable. And then lastly, our stakeholders. So who else do we want to include and be part of this event? And this goes beyond just following along or having visibility. Our stakeholders like Jock, we can allow him to read write, which is going to allow him to build any and all of this page. So the questions that we're asking the supplier, the scorecard where we're deciding how we're weighting certain characteristics or where our priorities are. They can help you build any and all of this sourcing event. From there, we can publish. That's going to send emails out to all the suppliers on your behalf. It's going to encourage them to sign up if they've never used the system. It's going to walk them through submitting their bid, all while you are waiting for the responses to come back. So as soon as you click publish, you're going to have this page here where you're going to be able to follow along with the timeline of the event. Going to be able to look at all of the supplier responses. I find this is hugely impactful for prospects and customers that are coming from a manual process, because this allows them to see, well, when was the last time the supplier logged in? Did they actually claim this bid? Did they get our email? You'll be able to see all of that information here and be able to just have a better idea of how competitive this event is going to be and know if our suppliers are having any issues or trouble or anything like that. We also want to be able to message the suppliers. So again, keeping everything in the system as opposed to spread out across different email inboxes. This is going to allow you to send announcements to the suppliers, answer questions that you may have from the suppliers, and also just chat one-on-one. If you have a quick question or comment that you need to make, we can always communicate with the suppliers directly here. And comparing and contrasting and doing your analysis of the bid becomes very easy here. What we wanted to provide was a way to have a very, very easy apples to apples comparison and to be able to look at all of the supplier responses in one view. So here would be any of the suppliers' responses to our worksheet, as well as the responses to that questionnaire. And we're able to see all of it side by side in a very clear and concise view that we can make sense of. And that your stakeholders can also do their scorecarding all in the same view, as opposed to having to right size 5 or 6 or 10 different supplier responses to make sense of it. It's all going to be in one standardized format where we can look at the info side by side and make sense of it. Also, while doing our scorecarding, all in one easy view. So with this comparison, with this evaluation and bringing in the opinions of your stakeholders, that's going to allow you to have peace of mind that we made an objective decision given all of the opinions and all of the priorities we have as a business. And then from there, we can go about awarding this bid, rejecting the suppliers, and moving into the next phase of purchase, which oftentimes is creating a contract. So from here, we're going to move into our contracts workbench. This is going to be a lot like pipeline, what we saw previously, but this is just going to be contracts. So on the left, we're taking a look at a few different boxes. I like to say that these first four here are providing you insight into what you're working on right now, what's going on in the present, what are the contracts that are being requested by the stakeholders through intake, what are the contracts that are in progress, meaning they're under internal or external review, and we're working towards getting this contract signed. And then lastly, the contracts that are out for approval. And then the bottom half of the page is trying to give you make you more proactive, helping you understand what are the contracts that are ending in the next 30, 60, 90 days, or even greater than 90 days that we need to get ahead of. We need to start running a new sourcing event to find a new supplier. We need to renegotiate the contract, terminate the contract. Whatever it may be, we're trying to give you that notification so you're not working reactively, but rather proactively, and you have a much better insight into what contracts we need to check up on. Now, if we take a look at a specific MSA here, we'll continue on with our CRM system example. Let's imagine that we're putting together a master service agreement for the awarded supplier. First off, you'll notice that this, again, takes on the form of a project. So this is just another type of project that's tied to the type of contract we're looking to finalize. So each contract type is going to have its own sets of questions, its own set of fields. It's going to have its own project plan that we need to follow in order to get a master service agreement signed. And we're going to track all the relevant details about that contract. I like to always say, what are the things you would have to download and scan through the contract to find? Let's pull those out into individual fields so that we can report on it very, very quickly and say, what are the contracts that have indemnification terms? Are there any red lines against our standard contract indemnity terms? And then, of course, we want to support the process of getting that contract to signature. So to do that, we have full version control. We have integration with Office 365 so that we're able to edit documents directly in Word collaboratively and track who had the last edit and what were the changes. We also have an integration with DocuSign, allowing us to get to that final version of the contract and then very quickly send to DocuSign, and we can monitor those signatures directly within the tool.
And Ben, I know we're coming up on time, but funny enough, we've had an amazing amount of questions that have actually rolled in as you've been talking. So definitely a good time to maybe take a quick pause. One, I just wanted to thank everyone. We're going to try to get through a few of these as much as we can, but we're probably not going to get through a majority of the questions. I apologize. I didn't realize there's going to be so many, which is great. But we will follow up afterwards. And, you know, as we talk through all of this, I hope you got the chance, and we haven't shown you everything, but the idea that we want to talk through, when you think about optimizing this concept of source to pay, at the end of the day, we have found over the years, and part of the reason why we built this product is the sourcing aspect is the one that we found is the lowest adopted within all the different modules we talked about. And we've just sort of gone about it slightly differently in how to go to market around it. And one question that, Veronica, that came into for you specifically is really the stakeholder adoption and speed as a factor of achieving maximum benefits to the solution. Just more or less, if you could talk to like when it was launched, like how did they adopt to it when a category was launched in the solution? Was stakeholder adoption optional, or stakeholders expected to engage within the solution? Do people have the option? Just sort of how that played out. Would love to take a few minutes for you to just chat through that. think you're on mute.
Thank you for letting me know I was on mute. I have two different mute functions, one on my headset and one on the screen. No, I think for us at Applied Materials, we opted to not control stakeholder adoption heavily. We wanted to focus more on trying to pull them into the projects and learn as we went along and adjust in an iterative manner. So there are definitely certain stakeholders that are much more involved and integrated than others, but it seems to be very tied around certain categories of spend. Of course, the people who are customers within IT are early adopters. Other clients are maybe not as in the tool as we'd like. But that's part of the trajectory around maturity, is now that we have these functions working, now that our team understands how to use the tool effectively and we're seeing the value, now we need to move in different directions. One, to start with our client management and start to enforce and encourage that adoption of the tool. But again, we wanted to make it easy. We didn't want anything to get in the way of our stakeholders engaging. So we didn't want to make it mandatory.
Awesome, cool. And you know what, thank you for that, Veronica, and thank you again for sharing all of this info with us and the team. I know it's incredibly useful, like you mentioned, when you were going through the process, just to hear from practitioners on how they did it. There's a few minutes left. I was just going to go down a few questions as folks asked. Is it possible to pull supplier diversity reports? 100%. Ben was actually going to share that. Then the supplier engagement, that's later on. If the business stakeholder signs off on the project in Scout/Workday Sourcing now, do you require the budget owner to approve the purchase order? Completely up to you. You can set up the flow in the approval trees. So depending on dollar amounts, etc., you can configure a lot of those. Savings reports, are these projects that are entered tactically into the system by a person, or are they set up drawn from contract details? So a little bit, we talked through like nesting of projects. So a lot of them are set up. You do punch in the data mainly because of how you calculate it across the board, and then it'll calculate some ongoings, and then you can link up the projects for that. Another, I think, question that goes, does the information auto-populate from project to a sourcing event? It does. With regard to like all the supplier data, any of the descriptors, any of the core information that you've entered that's applicable to the sourcing bid, it will carry on over. There's a handful of questions on the government related things. What I can say to that is, especially being part of Workday, we've got a huge focus on the government industry. Workday announced some news about that as well. So we're leaning in, and over the next few years, we are going to pretty much every compliance you could imagine from the government side. We're going to be focusing on the strategic sourcing engine itself, but we have several with public bids. You can link out every bid. You have sealed bids. Many things that do allow us to be compliant with all of these requirements, but we're going to be adding a lot more as well. And over the next few years, so you're going to see us over the next year plus release a lot of focus on government related bidding. But we already have several public universities, states, and even hospital systems, others using the product for those types of that are especially publicly funded. Let's see, anything else that's is there a maximum amount of suppliers and maximum number of line items you include in an RFP? We've sort of looked at it more of a combination of data points. We've developed it to 2 million data points per bid that we've seen on sort of a bigger bid, but we've had bids that have been 300-400 suppliers that are only a handful of line items, and on the flip side, we've seen bids that are 10,000 line items that might be only for 10 suppliers. So sort of look at the variety around that. But with that, I know we are at time.